They threw a mop at me in the middle of a lavish party. I remember it vividly, the sneering looks, the sharp laughter slicing through the air like knives, and that moment when someone raised their phone to capture a funny little moment they thought would turn me into their entertainment. But what they didn't know was the girl holding that mop wasn't who they thought she was. I am the heir to this place, the daughter of the woman who built Serenity Haven, not with bricks and mortar, but with trust and dreams of healing. And they were wrong to think I would stay silent. I've been here for a year in disguise, working like I didn't exist, but I watched, I listened, I remembered, and today I return. Not to retaliate in anger, but to remind them of something they've long forgotten. Respect doesn't come from rank. It comes from how you treat those you think are the smallest. Chapter 1, The Mop and the Laughter. I will never forget the feeling of that evening. The golden lights bathed the poolside in a deceptive shimmer. Soft jazz played in the background. Wine glasses shimmered, laughter echoed, until all eyes turned to me. I was quietly collecting glasses and wiping tables in a corner of the patio when Scott Morrison, my big boss, approached. To everyone else, he was powerful, confident, sophisticated, but I knew better. And that night, he chose to make me the joke. She's used to handling mops, right? Let her clean out the drain while she's at it. He laughed, his voice laced with implication, then tossed the mop toward me. It struck the ice bucket, sending shards flying and wine splashing across my apron. A long silence followed. Then came the laughter, not cheerful, but mocking, the kind that stings every inch of your skin. I saw phone screens light up, cameras aimed at me. In that moment, I wasn't a person anymore. I was a spectacle, a silent punchline, a moment worth watching for those with money and power. I bent down and picked up the mop. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from rage. So much rage that I felt it boil through my veins. I could have spoken out right then. I could have ripped apart the facade, stood tall, stared them down, and silenced them all. But I didn't. I simply turned around and walked away from the party. Each step felt like it weighed a ton, but I kept my back straight. I passed through the pool gates into the garden my mother had once lovingly designed. The laughter still echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. I walked down the cold staff hallway, silently changed out of my uniform, left behind the apron, soaked in humiliation, and exited Serenity Haven into the night. No goodbyes, no glances, just me, my worn-out backpack, and a promise I once made to my mother. If this place ever stops being a sanctuary, you must come back and make it into what I once dreamed. That night, no one knew who I was. No one knew that the daughter of the resort's founder, Elena Hartley, had just been humiliated like a nameless worker in the very courtyard her mother once built. But they will know. Soon enough, I left that night in silence, but I will return, and this time on a helicopter. Chapter 2, Anonymous in My Mother's Legacy. 3 weeks before that fateful night, I stepped into Serenity Haven for the first time. Not as an heiress, but as a brand new housekeeping staff member. The black Mercedes drove off from the family estate, leaving me alone on the marble steps. Clutching my worn-out backpack, my sneakers frayed from my college days, I looked up at the automatic glass doors before me, the entrance to the resort my mother once called her soul's creation. No one recognized me. Of course not. I was no longer the girl in a tailored blazer at opening galas. I was the new girl, in every literal sense. As I approached the front desk, the receptionist didn't even bother to look up. A glinting name tag read Brittany. Her red polished nails tapped rhythmically on the keyboard. You the new hire time clocks over there. Grab a uniform, lockers in room 3. Orientation starts in 20. She didn't ask my name. Didn't smile. Didn't care. Her words had clearly been repeated hundreds of times, emptied of emotion. I just nodded. Thank you. She didn't reply. And in that moment, I realized this was the world my mother wanted me to see. The world of the unseen, the forgotten, The workers no one remembers by name, the ones no one listens to, the ones deemed easily replaceable. Serenity Haven was no longer the place my mother built with love and vision. It had become a cold system, one where guest satisfaction came at the cost of sweat, silence, and sacrifice from the staff. I thought of her will, a handwritten letter in her soft, graceful script. You are not to inherit any authority until you understand every role in this place. Work as a regular staff member. Observe, listen, feel. 1 year. No privileges, no identity reveal. Only then will you be worthy of continuing my dream. In life, my mother didn't believe in passing down power through paper. She believed in understanding. She believed that to lead a place called a sanctuary, the person in charge had to know what it meant to hurt, to strain, to be disrespected. So I agreed. I became a shadow within the very place my family had built. I cleaned rooms, scrubbed toilets, washed towels, wiped mirrors. I endured the yelling. I saw the disdainful glances. I grew used to nameless hallways, the sting of bleach, and lonely lunches in a cold employee break room. But I didn't complain. I observed, and I documented every small act, every glaring injustice. No one knew I was recording it all like an internal investigator. Every manager's insult, every whisper exchanged during break time, every blind spot on the camera map of the hallways. I learned how to listen without reacting, how to watch without flinching. Sometimes I'd wonder, Mom, did you go through this when you started? And I'd answer myself, if you did, you must have been so alone, but you never gave up, and neither will I. There was something deeply ironic every time I walked through the staff entrance, that I, the rightful heir, was the one forced to experience the ruthless machine my mother once hoped to make different. But it was through those wounds that I finally saw what she had always seen. No one can lead through privilege, only through empathy. And that will be the one thing that sets me apart from men like Scott Morrison. Chapter 3, The Invisible Ones. Working at Serenity Haven felt like living in two entirely different worlds. One world was polished and fragrant, with essential oils, where guests were pampered towels were folded into swans, and every glass of lemonade came with a fresh mint leaf. The other world, my world, lurked behind cold, gray hallways under flickering fluorescent lights, among creaking metal lockers and fast-moving staff who kept their heads down and avoided eye contact. From the very first week, I became an unwilling student of what I came to call the art of invisibility. Here, staff were not allowed to exist too visibly. You weren't allowed to look tired. You couldn't sit for too long. You couldn't respond if yelled at. I remember my first shift in the kitchen. Marcus, the head chef, yelled straight into the face of a young trainee for chopping onions unevenly. "We're not feeding pigs," he roared, cheeks flushed red with fury. That boy was only 17. His hands trembled violently, and I saw something in his eyes, something extinguish. A spark, a flicker of enthusiasm, a belief that he was doing something meaningful. It was gone. And though I'd grown used to seeing that light die in people this time, it hurt. Then there was Scott Morrison. He didn't need to shout. All he had to do was walk by one slight nod, and silence fell like a guillotine. With his confident stride, clipboard always tucked under one arm, and polo shirt without a single wrinkle, Scott moved like this place was his castle, and we were the lucky servants working for his greater vision. "Every one of you is replaceable," he once declared at a staff meeting. "There are hundreds out there waiting to take your place. Here, excellence isn't optional, it's survival." No one dared argue. No one dared exhale too loudly. And I, though burning inside, quietly recorded every single word. But among all the faces of quiet resignation, I began to notice a few people. People who still held on to something. Small things, but priceless. Jordan, head of maintenance, worked from early mornings to late nights. His expression was always serious, but his hands, kind. He was the first to lend me a flashlight when I got lost in the utility hallways. The one who fixed the staff door no one complained about. the one who always kept spare light bulbs in his pocket just in case someone needed one. I didn't know much about him, but I knew this. He didn't need a spotlight to be good. One afternoon, after an exhausting shift cleaning rooms, I heard soft crying in the bathroom. Quiet, choked, suppressed. I recognized the voice. It was Emma, the 19-year-old girl, who always greeted everyone with a smile and worked twice as hard as anyone else. I didn't ask. I simply took the last granola bar from my lunch and slid it under the door. A few seconds later, a trembling hand took it, and then a fragile whisper, "Thank you." I placed my hand on the door, held it there for a few seconds, didn't say a word, because sometimes kindness doesn't need words. Sometimes it just needs someone to witness that you exist. Then there was Gloria, an older woman with silver hair, always eating lunch alone in the corner of the break room. No one sat with her. No one spoke to her. But I noticed how she always wiped her hands clean, sliced her apples into perfect pieces, and lifted her head whenever someone walked in, as if she were ready to share half that apple with anyone who chose to sit beside her. One day I was too exhausted to stay standing. I dropped into the seat across from her. Gloria looked at me for a moment, then gently patted the chair next to her. "You don't talk, huh?" she asked, her voice as light as a breeze. I shook my head. That's okay. Me neither. But sometimes sharing silence is enough to remind us we're not alone. From that day on, we had lunch together. No words, just cookies, fruit, and a few quiet smiles shared through the fatigue. I started documenting more. Not just the injustices, but the people trying to preserve their humanity within an unfeeling system. I took notes on manager habits, peak hours, where staff usually pause for breath, who helped whom and where the security cameras didn't reach. No one knew who I was, but I knew exactly what I was doing. I wasn't spying. I was observing as an heir preparing to rebuild a decaying foundation from the ground up. And in the shadows of that broken machine, I began to find the light. Chapter 4. A low blow and an awakening. I thought I could endure a few more months, that if I just kept recording, kept working quietly, by the end of the year I'd have enough material, enough reason, enough strength to change everything. But I underestimated Scott Morrison, and I overestimated my own breaking point. It all began on what seemed like a normal morning. A light rain fell outside, water droplets streaking down the glass panes of the front lobby. I was assigned to clean rooms for a group of business guests from California, the most demanding clients on the VIP list. I didn't complain, just bowed my head and accepted the task like usual. Despite the aching in my back, the sleep-deprived eyes from last night's shift, I still aligned the pillows, perfectly folded towels into perfect swans, checked every light bulb, every mirror corner, until I could barely breathe. I had just finished room 213 when Brittany, the front desk receptionist, came rushing in, her face pale. "There's an incident in room 215, she said. A guest slipped and fell. And they say it was because the floor was too slippery. You cleaned that room, didn't you?" I froze. Room 215 wasn't on my list. I had checked, but I had no proof to back that up. All assignments were printed, and the person in charge of scheduling none other than Scott. I was called into HR. Scott was already there, his expression not angry, but unnervingly calm. "This is a serious error," he said. "A VIP guest was injured. They may file a claim. Please submit an incident report and take a temporary leave while we investigate." I wanted to speak up, to scream that this was a setup, but I knew better. Here my voice meant nothing. I was just a housekeeper. No one asked where I really was. No one checked the cameras. No one thought I deserved to be heard. I walked out of HR heart heavy like stone. My hand clutched the unsigned report, eyes locked on the familiar hallway floor, the same one I'd walked 1,000 times with my mop, my cleaning cart, and the silence that devoured every protest. In that moment, I wanted to quit, tear everything apart, go home, end this painful charade of anonymity. But then I saw Emma. She was standing quietly by the break room door, gripping her inspection notebook, eyes full of concern. I didn't know how much she had heard, but in her eyes I saw something, faith. Then came Jordan. He passed by silently, placed a bottle of water into my hand. "Don't let them win," he said softly, then walked off as if he'd never stopped. And finally, Gloria. I found her in the laundry room where the smell of bleach smothered everything. She didn't ask anything, just looked at me for a long time before speaking. "A tree with deep roots doesn't fall in a storm. You'll rise again. I believe that." I returned to the locker room, shut the door, and cried for the first time since my mother died. Not from humiliation, not from being blamed unfairly, but because I finally understood if I didn't stand up, how many others would be forced to stay down. My mother once told me, power doesn't come from authority. It comes from knowing who you are and what you're willing to fight for. That night, I didn't drive home like usual. I drove straight to the office of Richard, my godfather, my mother's closest friend, and the only person who knew what I had been doing for the past year. When he opened the door, I looked at him with eyes that no longer wavered. "I'm ready," I said. "It's time to stop watching and start taking action." Chapter 5. The mask comes off. The air revealed Richard's office was exactly as I remembered. The scent of fresh coffee and worn leather books mingling in the air, creating a warmth laced with gravity. The window was cracked open, letting in the cool autumn breeze. Outside was the garden where my mother used to sit for hours, sketching layouts for Serenity Haven designs no one else had ever seen, but ones I'd memorized since childhood. Richard didn't speak at first. He simply poured me a cup of coffee just like he always had. As I sank into the leather chair across from his desk, he looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "You could have quit in the second month," he said slowly. "After that kitchen incident in Tennessee, or after working 16 hours straight, doing laundry in Asheville, but you didn't." Why, I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug, letting the warmth soak into my chilled palms. "Because my mother wouldn't have quit," I said. "She would have seen it through, and I owe her that." He didn't press further. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out a folder I'd seen dozens of times, but had never been allowed to touch. The inheritance file. On the cover, written in my mother's elegant, cursive, only to be opened when you understand what it means to truly work. Inside was everything: the legal will, the detailed succession plan, full management rights to Serenity Haven and associated assets. Included in the file was the power to activate the position of Executive Vice President, effective immediately if I chose to say the word. I picked up my phone. A message from Nina Foster, a labor rights attorney, still sat unread at the top of our thread. I typed quickly, "I'm ready, Monday, Serenity Haven, 8 a.m. Less than a minute later, she replied, "I'll be there. Let me handle the rest." Next, I called Human Resources at corporate headquarters. The night shift staffer sounded a bit groggy at first, but when I stated my name, his tone sharpened immediately. "Stephanie Hartley," I said firmly. "I need all internal complaint reports from Serenity Haven for the past 3 years. Include resignation statistics, exit interview transcripts, and any documentation related to Scott Morrison's management practices. We can have all materials ready for you before Monday," he said without hesitation. "Anything else you'll be needing, Ms. Hartley?" I glanced at Richard. He was smiling now, pride shimmering behind his eyes, and I nodded. "Yes, I want to schedule a full operational audit of Serenity Haven on Tuesday and prepare a temporary staffing unit. There will be some changes." I hung up, but my heart still wasn't at ease. I knew what I was about to do wasn't just retaliation. It was a rescue mission to reclaim my mother's legacy. And more than that, to build a place where people like Emma Gloria Jordan would never again have to suffer in silence. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in Richard's library, surrounded by legal binders and old photographs of my mother, and began reviewing every notebook I'd kept over the past 11 months. Names, dates, violations, patterns, severity, witnesses, proof. Each page was a puzzle piece, and by dawn I had in my hands a complete portrait, a rotting system fueled by fear and apathy. As the first light filtered through the blinds, I set my pen down. On the desk beside my notebook was a freshly issued ID badge from corporate headquarters. Stephanie Hartley, Field Operations Supervisor, Senior Personnel Division. For the first time in months, I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who was no longer afraid, no longer in a housekeeping uniform, no longer hiding. I am Stephanie Hartley, daughter of Elena Hartley, and I have returned. Chapter 6, The Mask Falls. Monday morning, something felt different at Serenity Haven. I walked into the main lobby wearing an entirely new outfit. Charcoal gray slacks, a navy blazer, and a pair of pearl earrings my mother once wore to important board meetings. My name badge caught the light beneath the chandelier, Stephanie Hartley, Senior Operations and Personnel Division. I was no longer the floor-mopping staffer they once ignored and dismissed. Brittany, the receptionist with the glossy red nails, looked up and froze. Her eyes scanned my badge, then widened as the name Hartley began to click in her mind, connecting everything that was now unfolding. Who are you here to see?" she stammered. I offered a soft smile, the kind she had never seen on my face before. "No need to announce me. I'll need the staff meeting room ready in 15 minutes. Make sure everyone is present." I turned and walked away. No need to look back. Behind me, I heard her fumbling to dial the internal line, her voice trembling. The news spread fast, like a strange wind moving through every floor and corridor. As I walked through the employee hallway, once full of weary sighs and dragging footsteps, this time I felt a heavy silence. But it wasn't the usual suffocating silence. It was anticipation, curiosity, unspoken hope. The staff meeting room was packed. I saw Jordan seated at the back, fingers laced tightly, eyes sharp but hopeful. Emma sat in the middle, row spine straight gaze, locked onto mine like she was holding on to a final thread of belief. And in the familiar corner, Gloria, the woman who once shared half an apple, in more than a little quiet respect, nodded slowly as I entered. I stood before them, no microphone, no dramatics, just my voice, and the truth. "My name is Stephanie Hartley," I began, "daughter of the woman who built this place, Elena Hartley. And today I'm not here to talk to you about power or titles. I'm here to talk about what has been buried in silence for far too long." A murmur rippled through the room. Some exchanged glances, others just stared, trying to grasp the reality. The door burst open. Scott walked in. Same polo shirt, clipboard in hand, face twisted in annoyance. He saw me froze. And in that second, I witnessed it, recognition. And then panic. I turned to face him, pulled a folder from my bag. "Mr. Scott Morrison," I said, my voice calm, every word heavy as stone. "In my hands are 23 internal complaints, sworn employee statements, and documented violations of labor policy, all linked to you, compiled over the past 18 months. Scott let out a dry, forced laugh, trying to regain control. You can't be serious. You think you can bring me down over a few petty grievances," I cut him off. "Not a few. A systemic collapse." I turned toward Sandra, the senior HR representative from corporate, already seated, a red-stamped binder in hand. Based on verified evidence and first-hand accounts, I continued. "You are hereby suspended immediately. All system access revoked. A formal investigation begins now." The room fell into absolute silence. Scott looked around, searching for support, for allies, but no one moved, no one spoke, no one stood for him. He looked at Jordan, a man he'd harassed for months, then at Gloria, a woman he'd ignored her entire career. And what he found was not fear, it was freedom. He left the room like a ghost. The door clicked shut behind him, sharp and final. No applause, no goodbyes, no well wishes, just an end. I looked around the room and took a deep breath. "We begin again," I said. "From scratch. No more fear, no more silence. From today forward, Serenity Haven will finally live up to its name, a place of peace, not just for our guests, but for every one of us. Emma's eyes glistened with tears. Jordan gave a small nod like a quiet thank you. And Gloria... She placed her hand over her heart and gave me a nod so full of pride I knew I'd remember it for the rest of my life. Chapter 7, Doors Opened by the Forgotten Hands. I don't believe in overnight transformation, but I believe in subtle movements like the ticking of a clock, like a seed quietly splitting underground. And the next morning I heard the first stirrings, laughter, no longer hesitant. Morning greetings, no longer swallowed back. The clink of spoons stirring coffee in the break room, no longer echoing through tense silence. I arrived early just as I had for the past 11 months, but this time in a different role. No longer invisible, no longer a name forgotten in passing. This time I came as someone fulfilling a promise. The old apron was no longer in the locker. Instead, I wore a crisp white blouse, my hair tied back, and carried a document longer than anything I had ever written, the Serenity Haven Cultural Restoration Plan. I started with the smallest thing, the mop, the very one Scott had once thrown at me in contempt, now placed in a glass display case right in the staff break room. Beneath it, an engraved plaque read, "Respect starts here." Jordan helped me install the display. He glanced at the mop, then at me, and asked quietly, "You sure you want this out here?" I nodded. It's no longer a weapon of humiliation. It's a symbol of what we've taken back. No one said anything at the time, but throughout the day I saw employees pause as they passed by. Some placed a hand gently on the glass. Some just stared and smiled and kept walking. That was the beginning. On the third day, I introduced anonymous feedback terminals, touch screens installed in locker rooms, hallway corners, and beside the HR desk. Anyone could submit feedback, no name, no explanation needed. Just the freedom to speak. A week later, I converted an old supply room, once full of rusted equipment, into a small, cozy space. There we welcomed a trauma therapist named Sarah, specializing in workplace healing. She had a soft voice like lullabies, but eyes that shone deep and steady like the ocean. No white coat, no clipboard. She simply sat arms open and said one sentence that brought me to tears. "Here you're not being judged. Here you're allowed to be yourself." Gloria was the first to walk in. Not because she needed healing, but to see if it was real. The next day, Emma followed. Then a third person, then 10. No one asked, "What did the last person say?" Each one left with eyes a little lighter. I kept going. I rewrote the employee handbook. I changed the line. Staff must maintain professional appearance at all times to... We believe everyone deserves to feel confident and comfortable in attire appropriate for their role. I removed the line, "Non-compliance will result in disciplinary action," and replaced it with, "If you're struggling with any expectations, speak with your supervisor. We're here to help. No more threats, no more judgment, only trust in people." And then came my boldest trial, the 1-week swap. Every mid-level manager mandatory would spend 1 week per quarter working directly on the front lines. Not just observing, actually doing folding towels, cleaning rooms, carrying trays, washing dishes. Marcus, the head chef known for barking orders, scoffed at first. "You want me to wash dishes?" I looked him straight in the eye. "No, I want you to understand the person who does." On day 1, he fumbled with the industrial dishwasher soap suds all over his starched whites. By day 3, he sat at lunch with the prep team for the first time in 6 years. By day 5, he submitted a revised cleanup plan, reducing post-shift scrubbing time by 30%, something no one had ever thought to do. I saw it in his eyes. Not arrogance anymore, but humility and respect and Gloria. Once the quiet woman slicing apples alone, now held the title Senior Staff Advisor. New title, new desk, new pay. But she told me what makes me happiest is that someone finally asked me to share stories. not to kill time, but because they wanted to hear them. I smiled and nodded. Emma, the girl who once cried silently in the restroom, was now team lead of housekeeping. She wasn't chosen because I favored her. She was voted in by the staff. Their reasoning, because she listens, and because she always hands someone a dry towel before drying her own tears. Jordan was promoted to Technical Operations Coordinator, now authorized to approve equipment orders, no more week-long delays. His first action, purchase anti-slip mats for the entire kitchen. No one should have to fall while waiting for approval, he said. Day by day, I watched Serenity Haven become what my mother had envisioned. No more shouting, no more guarded glances, no more invisible walls between upper and lower. In their place, nods exchanged in the mornings, cups of coffee poured without a word, laughter echoing from the kitchen into the halls, a feeling of belonging that no one ever dared to dream before. I know the road ahead is still long, but every step now is a step toward my mother's dream. And now I no longer walk it alone. By Chapter 8, The Echo of a Mop. I never believed a mop in a glass case could spark a chain reaction, but sometimes the smallest things create the loudest echoes. The first photo appeared on a Tuesday morning at 7:23 a.m. It was posted by Alex, a marketing intern just 3 weeks into the job. He snapped a shot of the display case, morning sunlight streaming through, reflecting off the gleaming brass plaque, "Respect starts here." His caption was simple. The new boss once mopped this very floor. That's real leadership. Serenity Haven. John's respect starts. Here I saw the post while sipping coffee in my office. I didn't think much of it. But by noon it had over 10,000 shares. Then it hit Twitter, then LinkedIn, then Facebook. Each platform added its own story, from janitors who had been dismissed, from waitresses and night guards, from service workers everywhere who suddenly felt seen. Soon after, my inbox started filling. Good morning, America. Le Piec Saring, live interview on humane corporate culture. The Today Show invites you to speak about leadership reform. Forbes requests a long-form profile on the journey of Serenity Haven. I declined them all, not because I feared the spotlight, but because I knew one thing. This story doesn't belong to me. It belongs to Gloria, who once quietly saved lunches for late shift coworkers. To Jordan, who changed light bulbs so others wouldn't walk in the dark. To Emma, who once cried behind a restroom door, but now defends her team's voice. And to anyone who had ever been forgotten, simply because they didn't sit in the boardroom upstairs. I was just the narrator. One night, after everyone had gone home and the lights in the building were dark, I stayed behind with my laptop. The screen glowed blank. The cursor blinked waiting, and I began to write, not a business plan, but an article titled How to Lead from the Floor You Once Mopped. I sent it to Harvard Business Review, expecting nothing. It was just a way to exhale the things I had never said aloud. 3 days later, they published it word for word, no edits, no cuts, no softened language. Beneath the title, a short byline, Stephanie Hartley is Executive Vice President of Operations at Serenity Haven Retreats. She believes the best leaders are forged through empathy, authentic connection, and hands that are unafraid to get dirty. Emails poured in by the hundreds. From executives hoping to rebuild their company culture. From MBA students disillusioned by stiff academic systems. From everyday workers writing only one thing. Thank you for seeing us. One email made me pause for a long time. It was from Dr. Patricia Williams, Dean of Business at Northwestern University. She wrote, "We would love to invite you to speak to our students. More than that, we'd like to discuss establishing a scholarship in your mother's name to change the way we teach leadership." I cried, not for the recognition, but because my mother's dream was not just alive, it had begun to bloom. We named it the Hartley Dignity Grant, but it wasn't just a tuition award. To earn it, MBA students had to spend 6 months in low-wage service roles, just as I had. No boardrooms, no blazers, just gloves, mops, and memories that would never leave them. Their final essay didn't ask, "What did you learn about business?" It asked, "What did you learn about people?" The first recipient, none other than Emma Rodriguez, the girl who once trembled in fear, now writing an essay that read like poetry. Leadership isn't about conquering, it's about healing, not standing above others, but listening to them exactly where they are. The award ceremony took place in the employee break room where Emma's journey first began. Gloria presented the check. Jordan filmed it. Marcus, the head chef, brought a tray of cupcakes homemade for the first time in his career. And I just stood there, quiet, smiling, knowing that every bit of pain I had once endured had finally been paid forward into something beautiful. Chapter 9, A Promise Beneath the Autumn Canopy. 3 months after everything had settled, I returned to the place I always knew I'd come back to, but only when I was ready. The small cemetery lay tucked beneath rows of old oak trees, so quiet it felt like time slowed down there. That morning the air was crisp. Autumn leaves blanketed the path in shades of amber and gold, like a carpet laid out for a silent reunion between mother and daughter. I walked the final stretch, not because a car couldn't take me there, but because I needed to feel every step. When I arrived, a simple gray granite headstone emerged from the earth, bearing just one line beneath my mother's name. She made spaces for healing. I knelt. I didn't cry. I just exhaled, as if all the months I'd held my breath had finally dissolved into the wind. I placed 2 things on the ground. First, a freshly folded cleaning cloth, symbolizing the work my mother had always honored in quiet dignity. Not the old mop, no longer a symbol of shame, but a new beginning. Clean, humble, uncomplicated. Second, a white gardenia, her favorite flower. Hard to find in autumn, but I'd called 3 florists, persuading one to place a special order. My mother always taught me, the things that truly matter are rarely easy to find, but they're always worth the effort. I sat down, resting my hand on the cold stone. I walked the whole path, I whispered. I did what you asked. I saw. I listened. I hurt. I fell, but then I rose. And now, Serenity Haven isn't a place people fear going to work. It's a place where they smile, and where they remember you. A soft breeze brushed through my hair like a silent caress. I closed my eyes, and in that moment, I swear I heard her laugh. Not loud, just enough for my soul to know she knew. She was proud. I stood dusted off my hands and stepped back a few paces. Looking one last time at her grave, I said softly, "I walked the steps you set for me. Now I'll walk my own. But I'll never forget who you were and who I am." In the distance, I saw a man clearing leaves from the path, the groundskeeper perhaps. He looked up, caught my gaze, and gave a small nod. No words, just a gesture. One silent keeper, greeting another. As I left, the sun began to rise. Beams of light pierced through the canopy, shining directly onto her grave, as if the universe itself was bowing to the woman who had lived her life, easing the pain of others. I turned away, didn't look back, not because I forgot, but because I knew she would always be ahead, never just behind. Chapter 10, A Dawn No Longer Silent Monday. No longer a day I dread waking up to. I arrived at Serenity Haven before sunrise, not because of a scheduled meeting, not to rush a report, but because I wanted to. I wanted to breathe in the crisp morning air in the very courtyard my mother once designed with her whole heart. I wanted to hear the familiar sounds of a place that no longer felt distant to me. I opened the staff break room, once dim and cold, now lit gently by warm yellow lights, carrying the faint aroma of baked goods. The old coffee machine had been replaced with the kind I once struggled to use on my first day. I brewed 2 cups, one for me and one for the person I was waiting for. Gloria walked in on time as always. Her hair in a neat bun, the same soft-soled shoes, the same subtle smile. But today she carried a hand-stitched cloth and laid it carefully on the table. Made it over the weekend, she said. Not as pretty as flowers, but warmer. I placed a plate of cinnamon cookies in front of her, the kind she once mentioned liking during a quiet lunch months ago. We didn't need to say much more. Outside the window, Jordan was talking with a landscape architect. They leaned over Sketch's plans to expand the meditation garden. The space once forgotten was now set to become a true haven for both guests and staff. Further down the path, Emma was leading 2 new hires, young women clutching their orientation guides down the hallway. I heard her voice slow, calm, patient. Marcus was arranging trays of warm bread for the breakfast buffet. I saw him truly laugh, as he teased a prep cook, wrinkling her nose at the smell of onions. At the center of the break room, the glass case still stood. The mop stood upright inside it like a silent gatekeeper to a new era. The brass plaque still shimmered in the morning light. Respect starts here. No one looked at it with pity anymore. They looked at it as a reminder that we had once been overlooked, once dismissed, once invisible shadows passing by each other, but not anymore. Now we saw one another fully, called each other by name, and knew deeply that we mattered. My mother once said, some legacies aren't built from concrete or money. They're built from how people treat one another every single day. And I think this is one of those legacies. A place where no one has to trade dignity for a meal. A place where even the quietest voice is heard. A place where respect isn't a policy. It's how we pour the second cup of coffee for someone beside us. I sat beside Gloria, took a sip of the hot brew. No cameras, no speeches, no spotlight. Just the comforting quiet of a place where I knew I no longer had to run. I no longer needed revenge. I no longer had to prove anything. I belonged here. Not because I was the heir, but because I was part of a group of people who had done the impossible together. Serenity Haven. No longer just a resort, but a living promise that kindness, when persistent enough, can change an entire world. You've stayed with me all the way to this point, to the end of a journey that wasn't just about revenge, but rebirth. If you've ever felt invisible, underestimated, or unsure of your worth, remember this. Sometimes the biggest changes begin with something small. A nod, a thank you, a moment of standing up for someone else. That mop once symbolized humiliation, but now it stands in a glass case. Not so anyone will remember me, but so that we will never forget where we came from. I no longer need to raise my voice to be heard. I don't need to stand on a stage to prove I'm strong enough. All I need is to keep showing up, to keep listening, and to keep protecting this place, a place where every person is greeted by name, not by title. If you've ever suffered in silence, if you've ever been humiliated just for mopping floors, washing dishes, carrying water, or cleaning windows, remember this. You are not invisible, you are not worthless, and you are never alone. We, those who were once overlooked, will rebuild this world from the ground up, not with vengeance, but with a kindness that refuses to be extinguished, because true respect always begins in the smallest places, and a mop held in the hands of someone brave can change an entire system. That mop once stood for shame, but now it rests inside a glass case, not so someone will remember me, but so that we never forget where we came from. I no longer need to shout to be heard. I don't need a stage to prove I'm strong enough. All I need is to keep showing up, to keep listening, to keep protecting this place, a place where every person is welcome by name, not by title. If you've ever had to endure in silence, if you've ever been humiliated just for mopping floors, washing dishes, carrying trays, or wiping glass, remember this. You are not invisible. You are not worthless, and you are never alone. We, the ones who were once overlooked, we will rebuild this world from the ground up, not with bitter revenge, but with a kindness that cannot be extinguished. Because true respect always begins in the places people overlook, and a mop, when held by a courageous hand, can change an entire system.